The wind was a blade against Salira's skin, each flake of snow a tiny shard of glass. It was a world of white, a blinding, merciless expanse that mirrored the color of her own fur, the very curse that had defined her existence. Her wolf form, a ghostly anomaly in a pack of grays and browns, had once been a source of whispered shame. Now, it was her camouflage in this frozen hell. She was just another drift of snow, slowly being buried by the storm, and a part of her, the part that had been shattered and discarded, welcomed the oblivion. The cold was a familiar ache, a constant companion that had seeped into her bones long before the blizzard had descended. It was the cold of her pack's rejection, the icy sting of Malric's words, the chilling finality of the bond-breaking ritual. She stumbled, a front paw sinking deep into a hidden drift. Exhaustion was a heavy cloak, pulling her down, urging her to simply lie still and let the white world claim her. Why not? What was left to fight for? The memory of the ceremony played behind her eyes, a relentless torment. She had stood on the ceremonial rock, her white fur stark against the gray stone, her silver eyes wide with disbelief and a desperate, pleading hope. Malric, her fated mate, the one the moon goddess had supposedly chosen for her, had stood before her. He was the pack's prized beta, handsome and strong, his eyes burning with an ambition that had no room for a flawed mate. "I, Malric of the Blood Moon Pack, reject you, Salira." His voice had boomed across the silent clearing, each word a hammer blow to her soul. "I reject your weakness. I reject your cursed form. I sever this bond before the goddess and our pack." The pack had watched, their faces a mixture of pity, scorn, and grim satisfaction. Cyrilda, the Alpha's daughter, had stood near Malric, a smug, triumphant smile on her lips. Salira knew then that this was not just a rejection, it was a calculated coup. Malric wanted power, and a pale, weak Omega was not the path to it. Cyrilda was. The pack elders had then begun the ritual, their chanting a low drone that vibrated through the stone and into her very marrow. They had called upon ancient spirits to tear the golden thread of the mate bond that connected her to Malric. She remembered the feeling, a physical agony that had ripped a scream from her throat. It was not a clean cut, but a violent tearing, leaving raw, bleeding wounds upon her soul that would never truly heal. She was broken, incomplete, cast out with nothing but the thin tunic on her back, and the brand of rejected burned into her spirit. Now, the physical cold was almost a comfort, a distraction from the deeper, internal frost. Her wolf was a fragile thing, smaller than the others, her stamina depleted. She had been wandering for 3 days, surviving on a few frozen berries, and the grim determination not to give Malric the satisfaction of finding her frozen corpse near the territory border. But that determination was fading, crumbling like ice under a thaw. Her paws were numb, cracked and bleeding, leaving faint pink stains in the snow behind her that were quickly erased by the storm. Her vision was blurring at the edges, the endless white swirling into a dizzying vortex. This is it, she thought, a strange sense of peace settling over her. Her mother, Elindra, had always told her that her white fur was a gift from the moon, a sign of a special destiny. What a cruel joke that had turned out to be. It was a flicker of black against the white that broke through her stupor, a patch of darkness in the suffocating pale. At first, she thought her eyes were failing her, creating phantoms in the snow, but as she forced her weary legs to move closer, the shape resolved itself. It was a wolf, a massive creature, larger than any she had ever seen, its fur the color of a starless midnight sky. It was a stark, breathtaking contrast to her own ghostly form. The wolf lay motionless, a dark stain spreading from its side, melting the snow into a slurry of crimson slush. Its breathing was shallow, each exhale a faint puff of steam that was instantly snatched away by the wind. Every instinct screamed at her to turn away. A wolf that large, even injured, was a threat. It could be a rogue, a predator who would see her as an easy meal. Her own survival was a threadbare hope. She had nothing to spare for another. She was an omega, the weakest of the weak. What could she possibly do? She should save herself. It was the logical, sensible thing to do. She took a step back, her heart hammering against her ribs with a fear that was sharp and immediate. But then the wolf let out a low, pained whine. It was a sound of profound agony, of a powerful life being leached away into the frozen earth. And in that sound, Salira heard an echo of her own despair. She saw not a threat, but a fellow creature at the mercy of a cruel world. Her mother's voice whispered in her memory, a soft, gentle echo from a time before the shame, before the rejection. Kindness costs nothing, my little moonbeam. It is the one currency that enriches the giver. Damn him. Damn her own stupid soft heart. She couldn't leave him. She couldn't walk away and let him die alone in the cold. If her life was to end here in this blizzard, let it end with one last act of defiance against the cruelty she had been shown. She would not become like them. She would not be cold and unfeeling. With a surge of adrenaline born from pure, stubborn compassion, Salira forced her exhausted body into action. She shifted back to her human form, the biting wind immediately attacking her bare skin. Shivering violently, she tore a strip from the hem of her already tattered tunic and stumbled toward the great beast. The smell of blood was thick and metallic in the frigid air. The wound in his side was deep, a vicious gash that looked as if it had been carved by multiple blades. Silver. She could smell the faint, sickeningly sweet scent of it mixed with the blood. A hunter's weapon, or an assassin's. This was no ordinary wolf. "Hold still," she whispered, her voice a raw, chattering thing. "I'm not going to hurt you." The wolf's eye, a sliver of molten silver in the black fur, cracked open. It watched her, but there was no aggression in its gaze, only a weary resignation. It was too weak to fight, too weak to even growl. That realization spurred her on. Using the strip of cloth, she began to clean the wound as best she could, her fingers quickly growing numb from the cold and the wetness. The blood was still flowing, sluggishly, but too fast. He was losing too much. Panic set in. She had no supplies, no herbs, no shelter. She had only herself. Looking around wildly, she spotted a small overhang of rock a short distance away, a shallow cave barely deep enough to offer respite from the worst of the wind. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. "We have to move," she grunted, speaking more to herself than to the wolf. "Come on, you have to help me." She wrapped her arms around the wolf's massive chest, trying to pull him. It was like trying to move a mountain. He was pure, dense muscle, and her own strength was nearly gone. He managed a weak push with his hind legs, his body trembling with the effort. It was a slow, agonizing process. She pulled, he pushed, and together they dragged his immense weight across the snow, inch by painstaking inch. Her muscles screamed, her lungs burned, and black spots danced in her vision, but she refused to stop. The shallow cave was their only hope. Finally, they were there, huddled in the small space, partially shielded from the relentless wind. The wolf collapsed with a groan, his breathing even more ragged now. Salira sank down beside him, her own body shaking uncontrollably, not just from the cold, but from the monumental effort. There was nothing more she could do for his wound. All she could offer now was warmth. She shifted back to her wolf form. Her small white body was a stark contrast to his enormous black one. Curling herself as tightly as she could against his back, she pressed her body against the uninjured side, hoping to share what little body heat she had left. The storm raged outside their meager shelter, a symphony of howling wind and driving snow. As the hours passed and darkness fell, the temperature plummeted even further. Solyra felt her own life force ebbing away, the cold, a creeping numbness that started in her paws and slowly worked its way inward. In the strange liminal space between consciousness and oblivion, she found herself talking to him, her thoughts a soft whisper in the shared space of their minds, a privilege usually reserved for pack or mates. But he was unconscious, and she was so terribly lonely. They called me a curse, she thought, her mind projecting the words toward the silent wolf. My fur, they said it was a sign of weakness, an impurity. My own fated mate looked at me with disgust. He broke our bond. Did you know a bond could be broken? It feels like being torn in half, like a part of your soul is just gone. And you're left with this hollow space inside that aches with everything you've lost. She pressed closer, the fur on his massive form surprisingly soft. I don't even know why I'm helping you. I have nothing. I am nothing. Just a rejected Omega, dying in a storm. But you looked so alone, and I know what it feels like to be alone. Tears she didn't know she had left to cry froze on her white fur. She poured all her pain, all her misery, all her feelings of worthlessness into her silent confession. She told him of her lonely childhood, of the other pups who mocked her, of the adults who ignored her. She told him of the brief, shining moment of hope when she'd met Malric, the devastating crash when he'd cast her aside for power. She gave him all of her story, a final, desperate offering to the only living creature who had not judged her. As the night deepened, she felt a change. A faint warmth began to emanate from the giant wolf, a low, thrumming energy that pushed back against the deadly cold. It was a flicker at first, then a steady pulse of power. It wasn't healing him, not yet, but it was keeping the absolute worst of the frost at bay. It was as if his life force, his very alpha essence, was fighting back, drawing strength from her proximity, from her confession, from her simple, selfless act of sharing her warmth. She didn't understand it, but she clung to it, her small body curled against his, a pale moon against a dark mountain. And together, against all odds, they survived the night. The first light of dawn was a pale gray smear against the horizon. The storm had broken, leaving behind a world draped in a thick, pristine blanket of white. Solyra stirred, her body stiff and aching, but blessedly, miraculously, alive. The massive wolf beside her was still breathing, his breaths deeper now, more regular. The bleeding from his wound seemed to have slowed, the blood mostly congealed in the frigid air. A sound cut through the pre-dawn stillness, the crunch of paws on snow. Many paws. It was a coordinated, rhythmic sound, the sound of a patrol. Solyra's heart leaped into her throat. Fear, cold and sharp, lanced through her. Rogues, or worse, a search party from her old pack, sent by Malric to ensure she was truly gone. She scrambled to her feet, her small wolf form tense and ready to flee, though she knew she wouldn't get far. She peered out from the rock overhang. A line of wolves was moving through the trees, their forms powerful and disciplined. They wore harnesses of dark leather, embossed with a silver crest she didn't recognize, a snarling wolf's head crowned by 3 stars. These were not rogues. This was a royal guard. Her fear intensified. Powerful, unknown wolves were the last thing she needed. She was trespassing, a lone, packless Omega. They would likely kill her on sight. A tall, stern-looking wolf with graying fur at his muzzle broke from the line and shifted. The man who stood in his place was broad-shouldered and radiated an aura of command. He wore dark, practical furs, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, scanned the landscape. This had to be their leader. "His Majesty's trail ends here," the man, Gideon, called out to his soldiers. The locator sigil is faint, but it points to this rock formation. Spread out, find him, be ready for anything. The assassins could still be in the area. His Majesty? A king? Solyra's blood ran cold. The wolf she had saved was a king? Her mind reeled. She backed further into the shallow cave, trying to make herself invisible, her white fur a blessing once more as it blended with the snow-dusted rock behind her. She had stumbled into something far beyond her comprehension. She was a nobody, an outcast. Getting involved with royalty, even accidentally, was a death sentence. The guards were closing in. One of them spotted the blood trail leading to her shelter. "Beta Gideon! Over here! Blood!" Gideon was there in an instant, his hand on the hilt of a large sword at his belt. He saw her then, a small white wolf cowering at the back of the cave. His eyes narrowed with suspicion, but his gaze was immediately drawn to the enormous black form lying on the ground. "By the goddess!" Gideon breathed, his stern expression melting into one of profound shock and relief. He rushed forward, falling to one knee beside the injured wolf. "Your Majesty, King Theron!" At the sound of his name, the black wolf stirred. A low groan rumbled in his chest. His silver eyes opened, no longer clouded with pain, but sharp and aware. He looked at Gideon, then his gaze slid past the beta to find Solyra, huddled in the shadows. He held her gaze for a long moment, and in that look, she saw an intelligence, a gratitude, and something else. Something deeper that made her soul tremble. With a great effort that made the air around him seem to shimmer, the wolf began to change. His form elongated, bones shifting and reforming with quiet, controlled power. Where the magnificent black wolf had lain, there now knelt a man. He was tall, even on one knee, with broad shoulders and a frame built of lean, powerful muscle. His hair was as black as his wolf's fur, a stark contrast to his skin, which was pale, as if he rarely saw the sun. But it was his eyes that captured her, that stole the very breath from her lungs. They were the same molten silver as his wolf's, ancient and wise, and they were fixed entirely on her. A long, jagged scar ran from his left temple down across his cheek, a mark of past battles that only served to enhance his rugged, commanding presence. This was King Theron, the Shadow Wolf King, ruler of all the northern territories, a figure of legend whispered about in terrified awe. And she had spent the night curled against him, whispering her deepest secrets into his mind. "You saved me." His voice was a deep, resonant baritone that vibrated through the small cave. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. Solyra could only stare, mute with terror and awe. Gideon and the other guards were now on one knee, their heads bowed. They were waiting, silent and tense. What would he do to her? A packless Omega found with their injured king. They would assume she was one of the assassins. Theron rose slowly to his feet, wincing as he put weight on his injured side. Gideon moved to help him, but the king waved him off with a flick of his hand. He took a step toward Solyra, his silver eyes never leaving hers. With each step he took, a strange warmth spread through her chest, a soft humming sensation that pushed back the deep internal cold she had carried for so long. It was terrifying and wonderful all at once. Then he was standing. Before her, a towering figure of immense power. She felt small, insignificant, a pale moth before a raging fire. She instinctively lowered her head, exposing her neck in a gesture of ultimate submission. It was all she knew how to do. She was an Omega. He was a king. "Look at me," he commanded, his voice softer now, but no less powerful. Hesitantly, she lifted her gaze. His silver eyes were searching hers, looking for something. And then, a jolt. It was like lightning striking her soul, a flash of brilliant, searing energy that arced between them. A connection, instantaneous and profound, flared to life. It was 1,000 times more powerful, more real, more elemental than the flimsy thread that had once tied her to Malric. This was a cable of pure starlight, woven by the moon goddess herself. The hollow space inside her, the raw wound left by the bond breaking, was suddenly filled with a warm, golden light. King Theron's expression shifted from gratitude to utter, soul-shaking shock. He took a sharp breath, his eyes widening. "It cannot be," he whispered, more to himself than to her. He reached out, his fingers gently tracing the air just inches from her cheek, as if he were afraid she might vanish. "Mate," he breathed, the word a reverent prayer. "The moon goddess has sent me my mate." Solara flinched back as if he had struck her. The word was a brand, a curse. "No," she whimpered, the single word a capsule of all her fear and pain. "No, you are mistaken." Her denial was automatic, a shield forged in the fires of her rejection. Hope was a dangerous, fragile thing, and she had learned to crush it before it could grow. How could this be? A king? A legendary alpha? Mated to her? A broken, rejected albino omega? The idea was so preposterous it bordered on madness. It was a cruel trick of the goddess, a joke at her expense. "I am not mistaken," Theron said, his voice firm, leaving no room for argument. The bond hummed between them, an undeniable truth. "I have waited centuries for this, for you." But you don't understand," Solara stammered, shifting back into her human form out of sheer distress, forgetting her tattered tunic and the cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hide. "I am nothing. I am Solara, of the Blood Moon Pack. Or I was. I was rejected. My bond was broken. I am tainted. Unworthy." She pointed to her own pale skin, her white hair that was now matted with snow and dirt. "I am flawed. Cursed." She expected him to recoil, to see the truth of her words and turn away in disgust, just as Malric had. She braced herself for the inevitable blow of this. Second, more devastating rejection. To be rejected by a king after a moment of such impossible hope would surely destroy what little was left of her. But King Theron did not recoil. Instead, a look of profound understanding and a deep, simmering anger settled on his features. The anger was not directed at her, but at the world that had hurt her. "Unworthy?" he repeated, his voice dangerously soft. "You, who found the most powerful alpha on this continent at his weakest, bleeding out in a blizzard and did not run? You, who had nothing, and yet gave everything you had, your strength, your warmth, your own life force, to save a stranger?" He took another step closer, and this time she didn't back away. His presence was overwhelming, but it was not threatening. It was protective. A shield. "They told you your white fur was a curse," he continued, his silver eyes blazing. "Fools! It is the color of the moon itself, pure, resplendent. They told you that you were weak. Another lie. It takes a strength far greater than any alpha's brute force to show compassion in the face of death." He reached out, and this time, his fingers gently brushed her cheek. His touch was not cold, but warm, sending a shower of sparks across her skin. "The moon goddess does not make mistakes. She did not send me a flawed mate. She sent me a queen, with a heart strong enough to rule beside me. They did not break you, little moonbeam. They tempered you." Gideon and the guards remained silent, their expressions a mixture of astonishment and dawning reverence. They were witnessing a moment of divine destiny. Their king, who had ruled alone for so long, had found his mate in the most unlikely of circumstances. Theron turned his head slightly, his gaze falling upon his beta. "Gideon, this is Solara, my mate, your queen." The declaration was absolute, a royal decree that echoed with centuries of authority. "You will show her every respect. You will protect her with your life. Is that understood?" Yes, Your Majesty. Gideon replied instantly, his voice filled with awe. He bowed his head low, this time not just to his king, but to her. To Salira. It was too much. The shock, the exhaustion, the overwhelming emotions, the undeniable pull of the bond, it all crashed down on her at once. Her legs gave out from under her, and the world dissolved into a swirl of black and silver. The last thing she felt before consciousness faded completely was the king's strong arms catching her, pulling her securely against his chest, into a circle of warmth and safety she had never known. Waking up was a slow, gentle process, like surfacing from a deep, quiet lake. The first thing Salira registered was warmth, a profound, bone-deep warmth that chased away the last vestiges of the blizzard's chill. She was lying on something impossibly soft, nestled under layers of thick, heavy fur blankets. A fire crackled merrily in a large stone hearth nearby, casting a flickering, golden glow across the room. The air smelled of pinewood, beeswax, and something else, something uniquely masculine and comforting that she instinctively knew was him. She opened her eyes. She was in a vast bedchamber, larger than the entire den she had shared with her family. The bed was a massive creation of dark carved wood, and the room was furnished with heavy, imposing pieces that spoke of age and power. A thick tapestry depicting a great black wolf howling at 3 silver stars hung on the stone wall opposite the bed. This was his room, the king's room. Panic fluttered in her chest. She sat up quickly, clutching the fur blanket to her chest. She was wearing a simple, soft chemise of fine linen, clean and white. Someone had tended to her, washed away the grime of the wilderness. Her cracked paws, now human hands and feet, had been treated with a soothing balm. Easy, little one. You are safe here. King Theron's voice came from a large armchair near the fire. He was watching her, his silver eyes soft in the firelight. He held a goblet in one hand but made no move to get up, as if he sensed her fear and wanted to avoid startling her. He had changed into fine, dark trousers and a simple tunic that did little to hide the powerful muscles of his chest and arms. He looked less like a wild king found in a blizzard and more like the ruler he was. Where am I?" she asked, her voice a little more than a whisper. "You are in my fortress, in the heart of the Shadowlands," he answered. "This is my personal wing. No one will bother you here." His fortress. The word sent another shiver through her, this one not from cold. The Shadowlands were a place of legend, a kingdom of warriors ruled by a king who had never been defeated, and she was in his private chambers. The intimacy of it was staggering. I should not be here," she said, her ingrained sense of unworthiness rising to the surface. "I am just an Omega. I will cause you trouble." Theron set his goblet down with a soft click and rose to his feet. He moved with a liquid grace that belied his size. He walked to the bed and sat on the edge, keeping a respectful distance. "The only trouble you have caused is to my heart, which I feared had turned to stone long ago," he said, his voice sincere. "Salira, I know this is overwhelming. I know what was done to you. I felt the echoes of it, the scars on your soul, the moment our bond flared to life." His gaze was so intense, so full of a gentle understanding, that she found it hard to look away. "You felt it?" "I did," he confirmed, "and it filled me with a rage I have not known in a century. The man who did that to you, Malric, he will answer for it. I promise you that." The mention of Malric's name made her flinch. The fear was a Pavlovian response, a deep-seated terror of the one who held so much power over her past. "No, please," she begged. "Don't. I just want to be left alone. I don't want any more trouble." "What he did was not trouble, Salira. It was an atrocity," Theron said, his voice hardening. To forcibly break a sacred bond is a crime against the goddess herself. And to do it to his own fated mate, it is unthinkable. He is a fool, blinded by a pathetic thirst for a power he does not deserve. He saw the fear in her eyes and softened his tone. But we will not speak of him now. Now is for you, for your healing. He gestured to a tray of food on a nearby table. You must be hungry. You have slept for a full day. A full day. The thought was shocking. She had been so depleted, her body and spirit so worn down that she had simply shut down. As if on cue, her stomach growled, a loud, embarrassing rumble in the quiet room. A faint blush rose to her cheeks. For the first time, Theron smiled. It was a small, hesitant thing, but it transformed his harsh, scarred face, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. I will take that as a yes, he said. He brought the tray over and set it on the bed. It was laden with roasted chicken, warm bread, cheese, and a steaming bowl of broth. It was more food than she had seen in one place in her entire life. She stared at it, her stomach clenching with hunger, but her hands remained frozen in her lap. She didn't know the etiquette. Was she allowed to eat this? In the king's bed? As if reading her mind, Theron picked up a piece of bread and tore it in half, holding one piece out to her. Eat, he urged gently. You need your strength. Hesitantly, she took it. The bread was warm and soft. She took a small bite, then another. The simple taste an explosion of flavor on her deprived palate. She ate the whole piece in moments, and then another. She drank the broth, the warm liquid a balm to her insides. She ate until she was full, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Theron watched her the entire time, his expression unreadable, but his presence a steady, reassuring weight in the room. For the next several days, a routine was established. Solira remained in the king's chambers, a gilded cage she was too afraid to leave. Theron was a constant, gentle presence. He brought her meals himself, dismissing the servants who were no doubt dying of curiosity. He would sit with her, sometimes talking about his kingdom, about the ancient history of the werewolves, about the stars. He never pushed her to talk about her past, but he listened intently when she found the courage to speak a few halting sentences about her life. He never touched her, beyond a brief, reassuring brush of his hand against hers. He slept in the armchair by the fire, giving her the entire, vast bed. It was a gesture of respect so profound it baffled her. He was a king. He could have taken anything he wanted from her. Yet, he asked for nothing. He was simply waiting, earning her trust. The mate bond was a constant hum between them, a warm current beneath the surface of their quiet interactions. It was no longer the terrifying, shocking jolt it had been in the cave. It had settled into a feeling of rightness, of belonging. It scared her. It felt too good, too perfect. She kept waiting for the other shoe to drop, for the kindness to reveal itself as a mask for cruelty, for him to finally see the broken thing she was and cast her aside, just as Malric had. One afternoon, he came to her with a beautiful gown of deep blue velvet. I would like you to join me for the evening meal in the Great Hall, he said, his voice even. There are matters of state that require my presence. Delegations from the southern packs have arrived to pledge their annual fealty, but I do not wish to leave you alone. Panic seized her. The Great Hall? With other people? Nobles and alphas? She shook her head, pulling the furs tighter around her. I can't. They'll all stare at me. Let them stare, Theron said, his voice firm but not unkind. You are my mate. You are their queen. It is a truth they must learn. I will be right beside you. I will not let anyone harm you or say an unkind word. I swear it on my life. She looked into his silver eyes and saw an unwavering promise. He truly believed what he was saying. He believed in her. Could she, just for a moment, try to believe in herself? The thought was terrifying. But the thought of disappointing him, of hiding in this room forever, was somehow worse. With a trembling hand, she reached out and took the gown. Walking into the great hall on King Theron's arm was the single most terrifying experience of Salira's life. The hall was a cavernous space, its high, vaulted ceilings, held up by massive stone pillars carved to look like ancient trees. Torches blazed in iron sconces, casting a warm, dramatic light over hundreds of werewolves. The air was thick with the scent of roasted meat, wine, and the combined, overwhelming scent of dozens of powerful alphas and betas. The moment they entered, a hush fell over the entire assembly. Every single head turned in their direction, hundreds of pairs of eyes fixed on her, on the pale, white-haired girl clinging to their king's arm. Salira felt a primal urge to flee, to shift and run back to the safety of the king's chambers. But Theron's hand was a warm, steady presence on the small of her back, a silent anchor in the overwhelming sea of faces. "Courage, little moonbeam," he murmured, his voice for her ears alone. "You are with me." He led her to the head table, which sat on a raised dais overlooking the rest of the hall. He seated her in the ornate, high-backed chair beside his own throne-like seat. It was the Luna's chair, a seat that had been empty for centuries. The message was clear and undeniable. Whispers broke out across the hall, a low buzz of shock and speculation. Salira kept her eyes down, focusing on the intricate patterns of the wooden table. She could feel their stares like physical blows. She heard snippets of their hushed conversations. An Omega? So pale? Is she ill? Where did he find her? The meal began, but Salira couldn't eat a bite. Her stomach was a tight knot of anxiety. Theron, however, seemed completely unbothered. He ate and drank, conversing with Gideon, who stood nearby, his demeanor radiating a calm authority that dared anyone to question his actions. "The last delegation has arrived, Your Majesty," a herald announced from the base of the dais. "Alpha Malric and his chosen, Lady Cyrilda of the Blood Moon Pack, to pledge their fealty." Salira's blood turned to ice. Malric. Here. Now. It was a nightmare. Her head snapped up, her eyes scanning the crowd until she found him. He was striding through the center of the hall, his head held high, a confident, arrogant smirk on his face. Cyrilda clung to his arm, dressed in a garish red gown, her expression one of utter triumph. They were the perfect power couple, ambitious and cruel. Salira's breath caught in her throat. She tried to shrink down in her chair, to somehow become invisible. Theron felt her sudden terror, his hand instantly finding hers under the table, his grip strong and reassuring. Malric and Cyrilda reached the dais and offered a perfunctory bow. Malric's eyes scanned the head table, his gaze dismissive until it landed on her. His smirk faltered. Confusion, then disbelief, then a dark, possessive anger flashed across his face. He looked from her to the king, and a flicker of understanding and fear dawned in his eyes. But his arrogance quickly overrode it. He couldn't comprehend the reality of what he was seeing. Before he could speak, Cyrilda let out a short, sharp laugh. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "I see the king has taken in stray pets." "You should be careful, Your Majesty. That one is broken goods. Barely worth the scraps from your table." The hall fell into a deathly silence. The insult was so blatant, so audacious, that no one dared to breathe. Salira felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted the stone floor to open up and swallow her whole. Malric, seeing his chance to reassert his dominance, grabbed Salira's arm, his grip painfully tight. He tried to haul her from her chair. "What is this?" he snarled, his eyes fixed on her. "Have you forgotten your place, Omega? I am your alpha. You belong to me, even if I did discard you. I broke you once. Do I need to teach you your lesson again? That was when the world seemed to stop. The air in the great hall grew heavy, thick with a pressure that made it hard to breathe. It was a power unlike anything Selira had ever felt, an ancient primal authority that crushed the will and buckled the knees. It emanated from the king. King Theron did not move from his chair. He did not raise his voice. He simply looked at Malric, and in his silver eyes was a promise of utter annihilation. Release her. The two words were spoken softly, yet they slammed into Malric like a physical blow. His hand flew open as if burned, releasing Selira's arm. He stumbled back, his face pale with sudden stark terror. He was finally, truly, understanding the catastrophic mistake he had just made. Theron rose slowly from his throne, a predator uncoiling. Every alpha in the room, every warrior instinctively bowed their heads, averting their eyes from the king's incandescent rage. The pressure in the room intensified until it felt like the stone walls themselves might crack. "You dare!" Theron's voice was a low, deadly growl that vibrated in everyone's bones. "You dare to enter my hall and lay your filthy hands on my queen?" Malric and Cyrilda fell to their knees, their arrogance shattered. They were trembling, their faces ashen. Your Majesty," Malric stammered, his voice cracking. I did not know. She is nothing. An albino Omega, a curse on my pack. I rejected her for the good of my people." Theron descended the steps of the dais, each step a thunderclap in the silent hall. He stopped before the groveling pair, towering over them like an executioner. "You speak of curses, you blind, insignificant fool?" The king's voice was laced with contempt. "You held a gift from the goddess in your hands, a treasure beyond price, and you threw it away for this ambitious shrew." He flicked a dismissive glance at Cyrilda, who whimpered and pressed her face to the floor. He turned his gaze back to Malric. "Let me tell you who you rejected. You rejected the woman who found me half dead, gutted by silver and freezing in a blizzard. You rejected the soul brave enough to drag me to shelter when she herself was on the brink of death. You rejected the heart compassionate enough to share her last scraps of warmth to save a life she did not know. You call that weakness? I call it strength. The strength of a true queen." Theron's gaze swept across the entire hall, his silver eyes blazing with power. "This is Selira, my fated mate, your queen and the Luna of all Lunas. Her fur is not a curse. It is a mark of the goddess's divine favor. Her heart is not weak. It is the foundation upon which our future will be built." He turned his furious gaze back to Malric. "You did not break her. You are not powerful enough to break something so precious. You only succeeded in freeing her from the pathetic fate of being shackled to a worthless, power-hungry cur." The king raised a hand. "As of this moment, the Blood Moon Pack is stripped of its name and its lands. You will be known as the Broken Bond Pack, a reminder of your alpha's failure for all time. Your territory is forfeit to the crown. You will spend the rest of your miserable life on your knees, begging for the scraps that your betters see fit to grant you." He looked down at the terrified wolf. "And you, Malric, will bow to your queen." Now, with the full force of his alpha command, he compelled Malric to lift his head and look at Selira, who was now standing beside Theron's throne. Malric's eyes were wide with horror and regret. He saw her now not as the weak Omega he'd cast aside, but as the radiant, powerful figure the king had declared her to be. He lowered his head until his forehead touched the cold stone of the floor. "My queen," he choked out, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Watching him, the man who had shattered her world, now utterly broken and humiliated at her feet, Selira felt something inside her shift. The fear, the pain, the shame that had been her constant companions for so long, they simply dissolved. They were replaced by a profound, overwhelming sense of release. Tears streamed down her face, but for the first time in her life, they were not tears of sorrow or pain. They were tears of vindication, of relief, of a shattered soul finally, blessedly, being made whole. She was not broken. She was not worthless. She was a queen. Later that night, after the delegations had been dismissed and the great hall had emptied, Solira found Theron standing on a wide balcony overlooking the moonlit mountains. The air was crisp and cold, but she no longer felt its bite. The warmth that now lived inside her was more than enough to keep the chill at bay. She walked to his side, her blue velvet gown rustling softly in the quiet. He turned to her, his expression softening as he saw her. The terrifying rage from the hall was gone, replaced by a gentle concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low. "I am," she said, and she was surprised by the strength and clarity in her own voice. "Thank you. For what you did. For what you said." "I only spoke the truth," he replied, his silver eyes searching hers. A truth they were too blind to see. She looked out at the vast snow-capped peaks, their tops gleaming under the light of the full moon. Her moon. She felt its pull, its power, as she never had before. She was no longer afraid of it, or of the destiny it had chosen for her. "When Malric rejected me," she began, her voice steady, "I thought my life was over. I believed everything he said about me, that I was weak, cursed, worthless. I let his words become my truth." She turned to face him fully, her heart open and unafraid for the first time. "But you saw something else? You saw me." "I saw a queen," he said simply. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. "The bond," she said, feeling its gentle, insistent thrum between them. "The moon goddess chose this. She chose you for me." She took a deep breath, gathering all her newfound courage. "But that's not why I'm here." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel the heat radiating from his body. She reached up and placed her hand on his chest, right over his heart. She could feel its strong, steady beat beneath her palm. "I accept this bond," she declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "Not because the goddess commands it, not because you are a king. I accept it because I choose it. I choose you, Theron." A look of profound relief and a joy so pure it was breathtaking washed over his features. He covered her hand with his own, his thumb stroking her skin. "Solira." He breathed her name, his voice thick with emotion, and then he lowered his head and kissed her. It was not a kiss of possession or command. It was a kiss of reverence, of homecoming. The moment their lips met, the bond between them erupted. It was not a gentle hum anymore, but a cataclysmic supernova of light and power and love. It flooded every broken piece of her, sealing the cracks with molten gold, making her stronger than she had ever been before. It was fire and lightning, starlight and soul fire, a promise and a fulfillment all in one. It was the feeling of finally, after a lifetime of wandering in the cold, coming home. Their mating ceremony was held a week later under the full moon on the highest peak of the Shadowlands. Every alpha and pack leader from every territory was in attendance, not by command, but by choice. They had all heard the story of the lost king and the white Omega who had saved him. They had all witnessed the fall of the arrogant Malric and the rise of their new queen. Solira stood beside Theron, not in a borrowed gown, but in one made for her, of silk the color of moonlight, embroidered with silver thread in the pattern of stars. Her white hair was unbound, flowing down her back like a silver waterfall. She no longer saw her appearance as a flaw. She saw it as Theron did, a mark of divine favor. She was the moon to his night sky, the light to his shadow. As they exchanged their vows, their voices ringing out over the silent, watching mountains, the mate bond between them blazed for all to see, a visible aura of silver and gold light that enveloped them both. The moon goddess herself seemed to smile down upon them, her light shining brighter than ever before. Solyra looked at her mate, her king, her Theron, and saw her past, her present, and her future reflected in his loving silver eyes. The path here had been one of unimaginable pain and loneliness. The rejection, the blizzard, the despair, they had been the crucible that had forged her. Her supposed weakness, her compassion, had been the very key that unlocked her destiny. It had led her to him. It had saved his life, and in doing so, it had saved her own. She was no longer Solyra the rejected, the broken, the Omega. She was Solyra, queen of the Shadowlands, Luna of all Lunas, mate to the most powerful king in the world. And as she stood beside him, his equal in every way, ready to rule with a heart full of strength and a soul full of love, she knew, with absolute certainty, that her life was just beginning. She would use her power, her position, and her compassion to protect the outcasts, the lonely, the ones the world deemed broken. She would be the queen she had always been inside, finally free to shine.